Alrighty, here we are. We're on. We're on. Fraser, welcome. Oh, what?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
My bad.
Alrighty. So Fraser, welcome. So it's
Thank
Fraser
you.
here and Chris.
Hello.
That's me. And it's going to be a short stream today, I think, because I'm marking a lot and I'm just in a bad mood. just and getting marks done. So, but Fraser's been busy building something in Minecraft. Do you want to tell us what this is? I haven't seen this before myself.
Yeah, so last week we talked about the PAD model for mapping emotions. So that is to do with valence, which is like the pleasure, whether it's pleasurable or not, arousal, which is, how sort of exciting it is, and then dominance, which was something new that we were looking
Yeah,
at last week. The week
yeah,
before, we were looking at a model that just used valence and arousal.
yeah.
And so I really struggled. I have very poor mental imagery. My apple is non-existent. And so
So your
I've
apple
used
is
Minecraft.
non-existent? What do you mean your
Oh,
apple?
have you done the test for how well you can picture, like how good your mental image is? You're
Mm.
meant to like picture an apple, and then they asked like, what color is the apple? Does it have a leaf on its stem, or all of those sorts of questions?
Oh, okay. No, no, never done that. Never heard of that one. Sounds like fun.
Yeah, it's gone around. It comes around sort of cyclically on the
Okay.
internet as people discover that some people can vividly imagine things and some people can't. But yeah, I fall into the can't category. So I've used
Interesting.
Minecraft before as a quick prototyping tool
Right.
for level
Okay.
design, because I mean,
Why
I've
not?
grown up with it,
Sure.
and yeah,
Yeah. Use the tool you know.
exactly. And
Absolutely.
so,
Who's
hello.
visiting us? Who is this? Who's this
That's just a
person with?
wandering trader. You can. There's a lot of things you can do in Minecraft. You can't stop them from spawning.
Okay.
um, but yeah, so I took the 3D model, I took the emotional model and used it in this 3D space. So down in this corner, we've got our negatives. I, fa- I found out that when we were looking at the diagrams from Wikipedia, they actually
Hmm.
put positive valence in this corner, and so it was like half mirrored, and that really bothered me. So I made it make more sense in terms of a graph. So yeah,
Mm.
negatives in this bottom corner represented by the black,
Yep.
and then in the top it's all the positives.
Right.
Um, so I also put some signs on here for the emotions that they've classified in the model.
Right.
So we can see in the bottom the low valence, low arousal, low control. We have depression,
Yep.
and then the same low arousal, low valence, but high we have contempt.
Oh, interesting. Contempt. Okay.
Um, and then on the far side, so the complete opposite of depression, they list excitement.
Mm.
And then, yeah, I've mapped the other ones in here. And I've also tried to sort of gradient it. So going down the sort of neutral middle, we've got our brightest, a lighter grey, a darker grey, down to black in the bottom.
Okay.
Just sort of that familiarity of the RGB sort of color space.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely. So hang on. So let's go back to excitement because I'm kind of interested.
mhm.
I'm excited to. So this is sort of high on everything. Is that kind of correct? So we got
Yeah.
high arousal, high pleasure, and high dominance.
hmm
Right. What's so if you go down in the dominance, what's is there one listed?
Yeah, so one below we
So
got
there's
joy,
joy.
and then
Okay.
they didn't actually list any for minimal.
Right.
Um,
So this is something I'm
so
really interested in exploring a little bit more to find out. I did a little bit of research to see if I could sort of find anything that did map emotions to each of these, but I haven't found anything as yet. So
mm,
maybe that's a little bit. Maybe I'm being a little bit optimistic. Maybe that's
yeah,
not quite how it works. I'm not sure.
I was hoping to add some more, but without going into reading full like papers and studies,
I
I
almost
couldn't seem to
emailed. I
find
almost
anything.
emailed you one, Fraser. I thought, oh, Fraser's really enjoyed it. Oh, I love
um,
reading. I love reading academic papers. They're just so wonderful. So,
I am not a very good reader, so
oh wow. Well,
I've
you'd
been
love academic
working
papers then.
on this 300-page book called Wayfinding for about 2 years, and I'm
Okay.
just now within the last 10 pages, so that'll probably take me another 2 weeks.
Right. Right. So one page a day.
I
Nice.
suppose it's not a bad goal.
Yeah.
Somewhere
Yeah.
to start.
You get through. You get through. You grind through. Now, one thing. Is there anything else you want to show us on here? Because I want to mention something as well.
I think the only thing that comes to my mind, and from building this inner 3D representation, is I sort of found this dominance axis to kind of be, at least in my mind, quite poorly defined.
Yeah.
And I know last week we talked about maybe using that to sort of represent the player's agency. And I think after sort of coming up with this, like, and I tried thinking about, like over here where we've got excitement and then joy, and then it's left blank for us. I was trying to think like what is this emotion down here, and I just couldn't quite figure it out for myself. So
it's very positive. So it's very positive and highly aroused, but with no agency.
But with no agency.
That's almost like, sort of being a quadriplegic and very happy and excited, but
I mean,
not able to.
Even then, like, if your mind is functioning, I feel like the human mind is to seek out those situations, right? Like, you're looking for those pleasurable arousal sort of emotions, and excitement makes sense if you're seeking it. But I'm like, I don't know what that means to not be seeking it. Like, you're just passively having a blast. Like, I don't know where that maps. And so I sort of started to feel, by the end of building all these and mapping the listed emotions, I felt myself being drawn back to that two-dimensional one. And then I was looking at it earlier and just thinking, like, well, if I'm experiencing, or the player's experiencing this emotion, how does changing their agency and their control over the situation pull them through that circular model? So yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe if some of these were more listed, I might find it more useful. But after going through this exercise, I think I'll probably stick with the two-dimensional.
I would suggest there are very few models that are perfect. Most of them are kind of like tools to give you a bit of an idea of how to do something. But to me, it kind of seems like this model doesn't necessarily translate in that way. I don't think that means it's not useful, because I think thinking about it as agency, is not a bad way to go. Because I think from a game design point of view, that is actually really helpful. So putting someone, like in an unpleasant, highly agitated state and giving them no agency, fear, aggravation, maybe even rage quit. So I think it allows us to understand different states of the player, but that doesn't necessarily mean it is a perfect model for the emotional state of the player. But I still think it's quite useful, and I think it's something that could be very useful in just understanding what's happening within the game world, particularly that agency, because I think the sort of arousal and pleasure can be, we can, I think, map that very much on the sort of aesthetic side of the game. So the story, the music, the art, and then comparing the agency, I think is a very interesting way to sort of look at games themselves. So it may not be perfect, but I think it could be useful.
Yeah, I agree, definitely.
So something, we did get a comment on the video that I put out about the emotion. It was interesting. So I can't remember who it was, but someone was saying that all of the sort of, I can't remember, was it all the bad experiences they've had in the games is when these things go to extremes. I thought, that's quite interesting. So it's like, even extreme. If you think of excitement, if you get too excited, you can it can lead to a heart attack, or you can actually damage your health. So if you go to an extreme, Obviously, depression, being an extreme there as well. So I was kind of thinking that maybe that's another thing we're looking at is that from a game design point of view, we're trying to keep within a certain range of these dimensions. So you don't necessarily want to pull someone too far out because then you get things like rage quit or boredom. So you think of mastery, you want things to be difficult to a certain degree. If they're too easy, then you get bored. If they're too hard, then you're likely to quit because it's just boring. Sorry, no, it's just too frustrating. The other ones. So I think it's a very interesting way of understanding the player's state within the game over time. I guess that's kind of what I'd say.
Yeah, I think it's a really good comment, and I like the idea. I feel like talking about it as like pushing them to the extremes is maybe a little closed, because it's hard for me to sort of imagine, like you said, like there's if you are overexcited, if you're pushing excitement to the extreme, the emotion isn't heart attack, right? That's a circumstance of being in that heightened state.
Yeah.
So I almost wonder if you could map extreme onto the idea of like prolonged exposure. So if you're keeping a player in that excited state for too long,
yeah,
that's where you're starting to see issues. And so yeah, I guess
certainly
you're thinking of extreme as sort of like length of time / exposure. Some emotions you can feel for much longer before feeling any sort of negative effects, and ones like anger or excitement, those time frames are typically shorter. So no, that's a really an interesting something I hadn't really considered. I was very much drawn to that idea of depressions and boredom as sort of the ones to avoid, but I guess that sort of fits in with that idea that I have of trying to pull the player around those emotions and not let them sit in one for too long, is that idea that it's becoming extreme in the sense of
well, contrast, I think, as well, like keeping in mind contrast is contrast of experience is very much, I think, what we're trying to go for, and that's where the interest curves come in as well. So you can see the line of the sort of level of excitement, the level of arousal, the level of pleasure or pain, and you need to mix those. You need to sort of have one going. You need to be going up and down between those, probably fairly regularly throughout the game to provide that level of engagement. I think that's an interesting, like, again, coming back to engagement, that's the one that I prefer over sort of fun and things. And that's, I think it's another idea to explore, that providing, those sort of changes throughout the game is what is going to keep players engaged and avoiding keeping them in one state too long. I think it's kind of what you were alluding to just then. Even whether it's extreme or not, I mean, you might want to be able to go to the extremes for a certain amount of time, maybe just for a fairly short time, but then bring them back and give them that relief from that situation. Yeah.
And then circling back to the point you made at the start, like, I feel so often those thoughts happen through the aesthetic choices of the game, but considering our sort of control /
agency,
thank you. How can we build that into the game design and the mechanics and the things the player physically engages with, and using that to pull them through these emotions?
I think this is a really, really interesting and useful way to think about what's going on in the game and what's going on with the player experience, modeling the player experience. So this is really cool. So fantastic. I think we'll keep I will certainly keep exploring this. Unfortunately, this couple of weeks are going to be pretty busy, but after that I'm going to be diving back into I'm doing a PhD at the moment as well, which this is kind of part of, and really get in there. There are some people have done some work in these areas, Some of it is more around the idea of creating like aesthetic agents that respond to emotion. So that's part of the research that's been done. There doesn't seem to really they don't seem to have done that much on using these emotional models in the design process of the game. So I think there's maybe some green fields work to do there. So if anyone's interested in getting involved in that sort of stuff, feel free to drop me a comment or something. Happy to chat. Anything else to look at in your little Minecraft world here?
No, that's all I got.
Okay.
I think maybe in the future, if I come back to it, I might go through and try and put some more emotions down. Especially, I think what would be interesting is seeing this map from excitement down to depression and seeing what these sort of neutral states are. But probably something that will take a bit of time and a bit of research to do accurately, I think.
Yeah, I think it's definitely worth exploring and doing some like visualization of this sort of stuff. And the blocks might be the wrong shape. I kind of wonder, because remember there was another one which was just points within the sort of grid, and those different points sort of was almost like a point cloud, and some of them with similar color, so they were likes particular emotions. That might be a more realistic, rather than these sort of discrete emotional states. They might be more flowing from one to the other.
Yeah,
I have a
for
feeling.
sure.
Yeah. Anyway, cool. I like our little man down the bottom with his two llamas.
Yeah.
I thought that was someone invading our stream or something.
No, unfortunately not.
No,
We couldn't name him.
All right, cool. So yeah, fantastic. Thanks for that. Alrighty. Let me just. What we're gonna do? Hang on. Let me just. Okay, we're back. Sorry, I just disappeared for a couple of minutes. Fraser, you still there?
Yes, still here.
Okay, so it's probably going to be a short stream today because I'm exhausted. But we're going to talk about the story, or the stuff you were sort of doing with the story.
Yeah. So last time we spoke, I think a lot of similarities were drawn to Stray and its story.
Yep.
And so Gemma and I played through it over the past couple of days, taking some notes, just to sort of see where we're at and sort of what's, make sure we're not stealing any ideas or treading over recently trodden ground.
Stealing ideas is that's the whole story of art. stealing other artists' ideas is exactly what artists do.
Making them look like they're ours, taking them and putting our own.
Putting your own, not just plagiarism, but actually adding to it for sure. Yeah.
And I think it was interesting because it's the first time I've played through Stray since the first time I played. Which was during the first time I got COVID, so maybe in a very different sort of headspace.
Yeah, probably.
But I feel a lot of the enjoyment of Stray comes from the aesthetics.
Yes.
And there's a lot of points that allude to a grander story, but I found a lot of the times when they would get close, they would kind of duck away at the last second. Most notably in the companion character, I think it's B12. They play with the idea of him being just a robot that was assistant to this scientist, and very quickly drop that and go, oh wait, no, this is the scientist. And there's a really interesting moment where, um, when he has that realization of, oh, I was human, um, and he shuts down and is, if you try and do anything that requires a robot, he goes, sorry, not right now. I'm trying to process this.
Mm-hmm.
And that ends really quickly as well. And so there were a lot of moments where I was like, oh, this is an interesting concept
Mm-hmm.
that I fear they've kind of just ran out of time to keep pulling on. And
Well,
so that
then,
was,
yeah. I mean, yeah, for sure.
yeah, and that
Yeah.
was mostly what we took away was there's some really interesting concepts that they've sort of tossed out but left. And so picking up some of those and seeing how we can fit them. The bigger thing we found from it was how well they create empathetic non-human characters.
Mm-hmm.
The facial expressions, stuff like adding sweat marks when the robots are exerting themselves or anxious,
Yeah.
just really fun, very cutesy, very, I guess, chibi, if you want to use like that sort of idea of really cute thing
Mm-hmm.
to really create that emotional connection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then the other thing I found um, almost immediately is how well they establish the emotional drive for the cat to return to the surface. Stray opens with you getting to go around and interact with the other group of cats before
Yeah.
going on a little journey with them and then falling into this abandoned city.
Mm-hmm.
And so I felt that was something we definitely need to think about is in the narrative, but also in the gameplay, creating a strong motivation for the player to want to leave.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that's probably the strongest sort of emotional drive that we can impart the player with. Hopefully, the
To leave.
mechanics and the progression system
to escape is
yeah.
perhaps the right word. Yeah.
But
yeah,
I think one of the themes that, and because that was one of the things I'm interested in, is the theme of like found family.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's well trodden. It's very sort of archetypical, but the idea of accidentally getting themselves into this community, the initial emotional response is to try and return to what's normal, but over time finding a place in that community. And Stray kind of, it has some of those ideas with the way the robots try to help, but kind of washes it away in this sort of pursuit where the cat is trying to get back to its cat family and the robot, its goal was to get out. And then halfway through they introduce the idea of, oh well, let's unseal the city so all the inhabitants can get out into the light for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought that was a bit of an interesting conflict in emotions where it's like, all these robots are so nice to you, sacrificing themselves several times to let you progress further, but your goal is still one that's quite selfish. And so trying to avoid that in our circumstance, which I feel like the most obvious way is to say, well, let's not have the resolution be that they manage to, or they still want to get out by the time they can. Have it so the narrative compels them to stay and foster that community.
So it sounds, compared to what you were talking about last week, it sounds like the narrative breadth and maybe depth has increased significantly. There's a lot more sort of detail that you're sort of going into now compared to last week.
Interesting. It's hard for me, I think, because we haven't gotten to a stage of really formally getting things noted down. It's hard for me to see that scale. So I feel like this is actually really helpful to get that sort of read on it. I think my intention is having enough space to pull out the most impactful parts. I think about it a lot from the NPCs standpoint, where it's like, I want to have a big range of potential NPCs to pull out the ones that have sort of the best, the most emotional connection and fit together the best. But I think every narrative decision I'm making, well, half of the motivation is to create a compelling world with interesting uh, lore, I suppose, and
Mhm.
that's coming from my short time as a D&D DM. And then the
Uh-huh.
other half is, yeah, what can I use narratively to motivate the player to keep playing and engage with the mechanics?
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Well, so yeah, like I was saying, there's the things you're talking about now. There's a lot more detail and a lot more nuance and a lot more depth and breadth. I think just in the last since the last week. So, and I think that's a really good thing. But of course, that means there's kind of more work
Mm-hmm.
to flesh some of those things out. Um, yeah, which is, I mean, that's fine. It's fine to have that, but obviously having that backstory is kind of really good and getting it down and yeah, it's. I guess I'm just sort of seeing scoping. We often talk about scoping. I think scoping may sort of become something you need to be considerate of as well with the narrative
Yeah,
now also.
it's always front of mind, but that that's good. But making sure that it is actionable is always the
Mm,
tricky part
mm,
I've found. You can think
mm-hmm.
about scope, but until you're actually cutting things.
Yeah, yeah, and maybe sometimes with the story, because you don't have to have it all fleshed out, the backstory, but you have to have sort of a good, like I was saying last week, you want to have an idea of what's going on, even if you're not going to tell that story. So some things may just be a line or two.
Yep.
Um, and interestingly enough, I heard someone say that this week, and about what was it? They were talking about the Alien franchise and how the questions at the beginning of the Alien franchise were far more interesting than the answers that that Ridley Scott came up with, and sort of saying, well, sometimes what's more interesting in narrative in a story are those questions, because quite often filmmakers, game makers, our answers may not be that interesting, but the questions can be quite interesting. And I thought that was quite a yeah, I think that was an interesting observation and something to keep in mind. Maybe the solutions that we think of are not that interesting, but the questions that we're dealing with are actually,
Yeah.
and it's better not to answer the questions. I guess that's the bottom of it. So,
I think that might be a trap I'm falling into because I approach a lot of this from that sort of DM world building standpoint, where it's like in the back of my mind, I have this fear that a player is going to ask me the answer to one of these questions. And, when you're in that seat and you are the creator of it and the person who has the final say on everything, it's so easy to assume you do have to have an answer.
mm-hmm.
And yeah, I guess that's a really good point is, and I feel like that's another like horror trope, right? Where it's like, don't give away too much because
Don't
you
show
let
the
the
monster.
audience do all the work.
Yeah,
Yeah.
don't show the monster. Yeah, yeah. Our imagination is far more compelling than anything that a film or game designer can usually throw at us. So, yeah,
Yeah.
that's something to keep in mind. I got something else to throw at you as well, which I don't know you may or may not be aware of, but Stray, the story is based on this movie. Have you ever seen this movie? Probably not. It's not a huge. It wasn't a great success. City of Ember.
No, that's new to me.
Yeah, this is So this was, when was it? 2008. Yeah, have a look at this, and you'll see the actual structure of the story is based on this. This is not robots or anything, though, and this is not cats, but this is the underground city, which is sort of falling apart. So that whole part of it, and I think even the ending and everything, the journey that they go on is very much based on this movie. So there you go. There's something else for you to do when you're sitting around with nothing to do, as I'm sure you do
Yeah.
quite often. Watch this movie. It's okay. It's what is it, 6.4. It's not amazing, but what is more amazing, I think, is to see that such a great game was based on such a sort of a fairly middling story from a fairly middling movie. Quite interesting that's kind of what the
All
inspiration was for the story.
Yeah, all you had to do was put a cat in it, I guess.
And robots, and replace the humans with robots.
Got it. So my character in Arvo should be a cat driving the car for the robots. I understand the mission now.
Something like that. Yeah, yeah. But anyway, look, there's plenty of material there, to get into if you wanted to sort of go further into it. And then we're not even talking
Yeah.
about, like, I mean, the other stuff we were talking about last week was like Maralinga, and the
Mhm.
if anyone doesn't know out there, Maralinga was. Or do you want to mention it? Do you want to talk about Maralinga? What Maralinga was?
Yeah.
Is?
It's funny. Yeah. Um, there's a patch of land in South Australia.
Which is where you
That
which is where you are.
which is where I'm
Yeah.
from and currently residing.
Yeah.
That was used for nuclear weapons testing.
Yeah.
And so
In the
yeah, I
50s,
mean, there's a lot
60s.
of
Yeah.
yeah, a lot of you know quite interesting and quite uh sort of charged stories and history around the space, but I think at its most removed, an interesting setting with
Mm.
an interesting sort of context that you can think of. The idea of sort of a irradiated patch of land, um, and yeah, you were throwing out some suggestions of how that can be used as gates to keep the player inside the map or outside
Mm.
of certain areas, and yeah, sort of drawing on more local and more Australian history, I suppose, to deepen that sort of artistic interpretation.
How far is Maralinga from you? Like, where I have to admit, I don't know where it is in South Australia. But,
I am having a quick Google.
there's a lot of desert in South Australia. If people don't are not
Oh,
aware.
yeah. That's probably, I would hazard 15 hours from Adelaide.
Okay.
Just based on me looking at the visual distance on Google Maps. But closer again from my hometown of Whyalla. Minus, 4 hours, so 10, 11
Right.
hours from there.
Right.
Yeah, I
Right.
remember my mum actually mentioned it. That was the one and only time it'd been brought up to me.
Mhm.
And but yeah, no, I mean, like a lot of Australia, most of the population is sort of on the coast. So not to say that that land was should have been used for that, but more so that yeah, a lot of the population, I guess, has just a physical distance between it, and so there's a weird disconnect.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, I love this. I think radiation and nuclear is an interesting narrative device
Mhm.
in a lot of ways, and especially one of my oldest sort of design inspirations has been. Have you seen the? I think it was in America where they were trying to figure out how they can warn future civilizations of buried nuclear waste.
Oh, really? No, I
Um,
haven't really seen anything like
the big constraints obviously being you don't know what languages would be spoken in the
that. Mhm.
distant future, and
Mhm.
obviously there's a want for these warnings to last thousands of years because the danger can persist for thousands of years.
Yeah.
And so yeah, there was a lot of sort of design research done on how do you warn civilizations without using symbols of danger.
Mhm.
And so there's stories about potentially breeding cats to fluoresce in the presence of radiation, and
God.
ideas of trying to pass down stories through like orally, as stories started as oral tradition and eventually became writing, but going to that, assuming that would last longer. Or my
Mhm.
favorite were the ideas of creating these landscapes of giant pillars that would be sharp and intimidating and essentially just creating a landscape that looked physically intimidating in the hopes that that would be enough to keep people away.
Okay.
Um,
So were you
and
thinking
yeah,
about
there's a
sort of
lot of
incorporating this into your design as well? I mean, is this
I
giving you some inspiration?
every design, every new design, it crosses my mind of,
Mhm.
oh, could I incorporate that?
Mhm.
But I'm still a little bit torn on the radiation idea in Arvo.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of the subtext I want to sort of the story to revolve around is more about corporate greed and the sort of repercussions of making actions that are the most short-sighted.
Mm-hmm.
And so in my head there's kind of ideas about uh, these sentient robots being fenced off deliberately but in the cheapest way possible. And so I think using radiation as a sort of barrier to that might be uh, almost giving it a pass,
Oh, yeah.
But you could, I mean, it all depends how you frame it, because you could also swing that and say, well, they're robots. They would dump them in an irradiated place because the robots aren't going to be affected, but it'll
Mm.
keep people from finding it. So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, but I
Yeah.
think that's one of the things I found because I've started working on a narrative design document template
Yep.
because with such a large scope, I'm trying to be efficient in the way I'm creating work for the game.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the things I'm going to try is using themes as sort of core pillars. So sort of, yeah, I mentioned found family, but coming up with a couple other themes that I think are strong, building some sort of pillar around that I think really encapsulates it, and then basing narrative decisions from there.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, if you can get those
So
themes, core themes there, yeah. Yeah.
yeah, it's a different approach. I usually go for like rule of cool sort of story building, coming up with the coolest ideas and then making a narrative that justifies that. But I
I
think
mean,
for
sure.
something
Yeah.
of this scale, working the other way around might be more efficient.
So let me ask you a different question, I guess. Like, or maybe this is more than one question. This is a couple of questions. That I guess how big do you envisage this game being? So like, how much time? How many people? Because I guess I'm looking at it at the moment, and you're sort of talking about, there's the story, there's the robots, designing the robots and what have you. There's the creating the vehicles, etc. And I know you're only a team of two. So at the moment, I'm seeing like this huge game, which could never be done by a team of two, really, in any sort of time frame. So I'm kind of wondering, were you wanting to expand? Are you looking to get money so that you can build on these ideas, or are you going to have to just really pare things down and maybe rethink it and cut a lot of this stuff and just get things done
Yeah.
with the
Uh,
two of you in that time frame?
the current sort of position we're in is we've applied for funding through Screen Australia, which would give the two of us a decent budget to come up with a prototype. And that prototype, we imagine, is one vehicle, one town, the core mechanics, and some basic art, essentially. And then with that, taking that to get more funding. Yeah, I mean, more time would be nice, but I keep thinking about certain areas like sound and music in particular. Neither of us are quite experienced, so having somebody who could tackle that, or even being able to, hire somebody to do 3D models and implementation, because we have those basic skills, but it would take us. It would take us such a long time if we had to do it ourselves. It's one of those ones where our skills could be better used in the design and the programming and the narrative areas if we had the money to hire somebody, because they would be able to knock out these hopefully relatively simple 3D models much faster. So yeah, long-winded answer. The short version is definitely needing more money. If we don't get it, then I think this would mostly be ended up a prototype, which is still good. It's still something we're interested in, and I think can be like a good portfolio thing, and at the very least, good practice and good experience working on things and building skills and whatnot.
Yeah. So I guess I'm just sort of going back to your. I mean, this is one of your inspiration games, and this is obviously. I don't know there's much story behind this one. So if you were wanting to sort of make something small and what have you, if this is the sort of experience you were kind of after, then minimal sort of backstory on that one, minimal narrative. But I guess this is kind of what you're looking at. This is your own art, concept art, which looks to me sort of a little bit more than this one. So I guess I'm sort of asking maybe a difficult question here. I guess I'm just sort of saying that, unless you get a lot more money and resources, you might be forced to sort of make a decision about sort of how things are going to look, how things are going to work.
Yeah. And I think it's a tough process to do that sort of paring back. But a part of me thinks it's maybe a better approach.
Or maybe
coming
more realistic.
in with a broad set of ideas.
Mm-hmm.
It's really pushing that creativity and finding new things and finding new combinations. And then, you just have to have that sort of pragmatism to come in and be like, this has to go, this has to go, this has to go, this can't be that. And, paring it down to be the really good stuff that you have come up with. But much easier said than done, for sure.
It is. It's very easy, I think, to get sort of, I don't want to say carried away exactly, but when you're being creative, particularly at the beginning in the concept phase, it's very easy to sort of, we're doing marvelous, and then you think, we need a team of at least 20 for about 2 years to get this game done. We have, the limitations are currently a little bit more than that. It is hard. It's definitely hard. I mean, I wish I had, millions of dollars to employ people and get stuff done. The other thing is to think about, even if it doesn't happen this time, maybe the next game, because sometimes you're sort of doing your first game, which would be your first sort of more commercial, non-student kind of game. Sometimes like being, the first one, getting the runs on the board, and then once you've got some runs on the board, then people are going to take it a little bit more seriously next time round, and you can sort of have a larger project, I guess. So, getting something finished is better. Something simple finished is probably better than getting something really amazing not finished.
Yeah. Yeah, that has crossed my mind. I think part of the application process was encouraging us to sort of have these big thinking and this like broad creativity. Which, I'm not disparaging. I really enjoy the process and I think it's good to practice. But it has crossed my mind a couple times where I'm like, if we, came up with one mechanic and found the most simple way to integrate it and actually properly went through the process of developing it and putting it out and publishing it, you gain, maybe you don't gain as much depth of experience in some of those tasks as you do in the early stages of a bigger thing, but you gain the broad experience of all the stages of pre-production, production, and publishing. So, it's on my mind.
And don't forget, having something finished and published is significant, whereas having something significant, like something large and unfinished and unpublished, is kind of doesn't mean anything. It means you can't finish things. So, I mean, I don't want to put anyone off. Like, having big ideas is great, but finishing stuff is fantastic. There's no better feeling than actually just publishing, hitting that publish thing and getting it out there and watching people engage with it and download it and all that sort of stuff. But I guess it's something to think about. It's something, in your situation with Gemma as well, like what you want to do, what this game is going to fulfill, how much time, how much energy you're going to have to put towards it. Yeah.
And I think the result of this grant will kind of speak to that. And I think if we're being realistic, that should be the sort of pivotal point. If we get the money, then go hardcore, come up with a solid prototype that we can shop around and try and
Yeah.
get more interest in. And if not, salvage what we can and publish anything that we can from it, anything that's complete.
Yeah.
Because I mean, it's hard to exist as an indie, is what I've heard in the current landscape. But what I've heard is good advice is being able to put things out, because that's the only way you'll get attention and build all those skills. So
Which means smaller projects. So I guess the question's going to be, do you want to spend 6 months on a project? If that's the case, then you'd want to sort of go for something. Well, to be honest, something more like this one. This is kind of I'd say this is like a 3 to 6 month project for 2 people, something like that. Something pretty simple with a nice little core mechanic, and or if you're going to go for other things. Like I think this is what game was this from? Where was this from?
Paparazzi.
Is that what it is?
Yes, that's that one. That one feels kind of like my ideal scale for Arvo. That's got multiple environments, which are all sort of different sceneries and landscapes, populated with all these different dogs and lots of little storytelling things, lots of little environment things, giving the player heaps of space to explore. And then that primary mechanic of snapping the photos, and then you get different ratings based on the quality, which gives you different unlocks. It's that's my ideal scale. But I see what you mean. I sort of see web fishing as like where I would love to have the prototype, but less polished. I think the other thing that gets to me is I feel like the recent sort of wave of indie hits, starting with Among Us, but I think the next big shift in that was Lethal Company, is that sort of emergent gameplay from
simple
playing
mechanics,
with friends.
It's
Simple mechanics, but the complexity and the replayability comes from being able to play with friends. And I think the proximity chat dynamic is one of the things that has just fueled that. And that's where I look at that and go, man, maybe I should have gone and learned how to code and learn how to network, because that's sort of if I think about it realistically, that's probably our biggest weakness area, is programming, and then the idea of trying to hook up a multiplayer online sort of network. I wouldn't even know where to start. So.
That's definitely a specialty thing. But I mean, if you get some money, I mean, you could do that. So I guess I'm just throwing it out there and thinking, okay, well, if you wanted to do that emergent gameplay amongst friends, it would be what you could do. I'm not saying you should do. I'm just saying what you could do is turn your game into something like a sort of a racing circuit game or something, where you're actually you're actually racing against friends or something. I don't know, to deliver a package or whatever. That's the sort of. I'm not saying you should do that. I'm just saying that would work.
Yeah, there's a corner of my brain that I keep locked up, because that's the only thought that cycles through there, is the idea of making it a multiplayer experience. But I'm like, that's, I can dream about adding good music and these different mechanics and these branching stories. I'm not allowed to dream about that until either I learn how to do that, or we find someone who can. That stays compartmentalized. Sure.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. It is a lot of work. It's quite difficult. So there's easier and harder approaches, but it definitely changes the whole story. So I mean, that's actually interesting to have that chat, because I think just sort of where you guys are at the moment, because you are a small team of 2. You do have, obviously we're aware of your limitations, particularly coding wise. Although, I mean, your coding's not too bad to do sort of basic stuff. I mean, I think you shouldn't have any problems doing your little shift. What was it? Active shift mechanics. Active shift mechanic. I mean, that sounds like it's probably doable using blueprints and stuff. But yeah, limits. I guess one of the things the concern I have actually is and maybe I'm mistaken, but I think is more the art side of things. So I mean, the modeling and art. I'm not sure whether I just haven't necessarily seen that from yourself and Gemma, but I'm pretty sure I recall you had another artist working with you on Deep Climb.
Yeah, we had Benji, who has been studying 3D art and design
Yeah.
specifically. So that was really nice to have. Um, Part of that course at uni did involve quite a bit of 3D modeling.
Mm-hmm.
We had a couple classes in Maya, one in Houdini,
Sure.
along with some animation on top of that. So
Yeah.
we've had the formal education, but yeah, um, we had an interesting chat about that. Especially, I think last week you mentioned, a lot of indie games at the moment have a really each one has something really gripping with the art style, something
Mm.
really different or unique that's really compelling.
Mm-hmm.
And so we did have that did sort of cross the conversation. And I think the other thing is it's like this has got to be a pretty universal experience for indie devs, I think. But every conversation, it's like, okay, there's 3 more hats that I need to wear, or I need to jump out of my sort of programming space into a design space, or even the book I mentioned that I've been reading. It's making me furiously want to start designing a map, but I'm like, I know I should get the narrative bit down first. So I think we can come up with pretty good 3D models and textures.
It's probably something you need to confirm, because
Yeah,
if not, you're going to want to find someone who can.
yeah,
Yeah, and it's a pretty significant skill to come up with something which is really like in 3D. Yeah, which is really eye catching, I guess. You wanting to get someone who's a talented artist. Um, yeah, but anyway, I'd be if I were you guys, I'd be sort of going into that and making sure you've got that you can do that. That would be one thing I'd be looking at fairly soon, because if you don't, I mean, you can find different people. You know people you're studying with. So for some reason, if you find actually it's harder than you think it is, and you think you are, no, we need to get someone else, then you can do that.
yeah. I think it's
Mm.
tough as well. Just, I mean, with the current sort of economic goings on, um, it's a weird feeling of like I am a broke student, and so I'm working on this game for free, but I feel guilty going to another student who is presumably just as broke and asking them to work on it for free.
Well, I
But
was watching actually an Australian YouTuber, Struthless is his name, and he's an artist. Um, and
mm,
he was just recently, his last video he put out, I think he was talking about how recessions are great for art and artists because no one's got any money. so so it gives time for creatives to actually get in there and do stuff. So maybe I'd suggest approaching people, particularly people you've worked with before. You may not be able to offer money, but I think artists are pretty used to having no money, unless
and
they're
I
one of
think
the
it
very
helps
few that
when
makes lots of money.
the sort of heads are also not making money off of it, and it's not a case of
Yeah,
where we're
yeah, yeah,
holding the
yeah.
pay. It's
Oh,
there's
yeah,
no money
absolutely.
here.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I would definitely look. You're only a team of 2. I think you're too small. I guess this is what I'm. This is the feeling I've got. I think you need at least one more person. You need someone who is devoted to the art. I mean, that's going to be a core part of what you're doing. I would really recommend finding someone who has a great art style and just say, hey, come and work with us. We're going to be amazingly successful in the future.
Yeah,
um,
but I think that's where sort of this process we're going through gradually. The idea of creating a structured sort of design um, is going to be really beneficial. I think it's
mhm.
going to be a lot easier. I was saying that to Gemma when we were making our narrative design doc.
Yeah, yeah,
I was saying, when I do this personally, it's just one long scrolling, endless number of pages, and I was like, but
sure.
if we want anyone to come and work with it, it should be as accessible as possible.
It has to
it
be.
should be as
It has
yeah,
to be.
exactly.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you're going to waste time or you'll lose people. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's just a matter of getting it, pushing it forward, and
Yeah.
getting the ball rolling, and then seeing what we pick up on the way down, I suppose.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. We might wrap it up there. A little bit early
Yeah.
today. And we may not get together next week, I think, because I'm still going to be sorting out marks and everything. So we may have a week off next week and be back. I think the week after we'll sort of talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah. I think a week break sounds good. So
Yeah, I think that might, I think I have to. I don't think I got a choice. I've just got to got to get this marking done, and there's all sorts of other stuff I've got to get done as well. I've got a game I've got to finish as well. I haven't done anything for 3 months. It's killing me.
it's a lot on the pile.
There's too much. There's way too much. But anyway, that's life. So cool. Well, good to chat, and we'll be back again. What are you planning to work on over the next couple of sort of between now and next time we chat? What do you think you're going to be? What's your sort of focus?
I want to have my narrative broad strokes figured out. So location, have some NPCs and the player character stories broadly figured out. And I really want a car in a test environment. Ideally with some sort of gear shifting.
Cool.
This
is in the next 2 weeks. I mean, that sounds great.
That's I've got to have high. I give high goals. So that I achieve a fair amount. Okay. If I don't set the goal too high, then I don't do anything.
Well, we could talk about, because I know you are spending time looking at the Unreal Engine 5 vehicle system, aren't you?
Yes.
So even if you're not finished, I mean, it could be interesting just to have a chat about that, the technical aspect of that, because I haven't really looked at vehicles for a long, long time. So even if you haven't finished, maybe that's something we can have a chat about as well.
Yeah.
Cool.
I like that. That gives me a clear goal that I need to push myself towards. So that works great. You
want to be able to answer questions if they come up. Yeah. Yeah. Well, welcome to my world. You're giving a class in something. Someone asks a question. You go, I have no clue. I don't know. I'm going to give it this stuff.
You get back to me next week.
Yeah, exactly. I'm teaching C# and Unity at the moment, and I'm not an expert in C# or Unity. So that's been my life for the last 3 months. I have done it before though, and I know a lot about game engines. So, but it's like okay. All right, so we'll wrap that up there, and see you next week. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah.
Oh no, the week after. The week after.
Week after.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Cheers, everyone.